and welcome to the Two Unlikely Christians podcast. I am comedian and former juvenile delinquent Pat McCool, coming to you from the piney woods of Mississippi, 3 miles from a former Army nuclear test site, and now all the way to London, England, to esteemed psychotherapist and addiction specialist, and a man who once swam down the River Thames naked to protest the shrinking size of the cornflakes box, Richard Turrell.
That's me. I'm here. Hello, Pat. Nice to see you. Nice
How
to
you
see
doing,
you.
man?
Yeah, I'm all right, man. You?
I'm good. Everything going good in London.
Yeah, it's all good over here, mate. All good. How about you? Good hunting so far this week?
What's that?
Good hunting? The hunting's going well?
Oh,
Yeah.
well, as I've told you, I don't hunt. I'm actually the guy going down the road honking at the deer, hey, you need to get out of here because Cletus and the F-150 is coming over the hill with a $3,000 rifle and a scope. As I told you, I will eat all the beef you want to give me, but I'm not a hunter.
Fair enough.
I
And
do have them in. What's that?
the moonshine? How's the still? How is it?
No, still's going well. Yeah, still, yeah, we'll go
Excellent.
out there, throw a few logs on and see what vintage we come up with this year.
Nice. And the
So,
trailer?
yeah,
Trailer ready for winter?
trailer, yeah, we get the trailer ready. Get everything just ready to hunker down and
Good
uh, and
stuff.
and, sur- and survive until spring. We got to go. You go into town for provisions because I
Yeah.
live about 30 miles outside of town. So other than that, we're doing good there. So anyway, today let us talk about a little bit of a takeoff on what we did last week. We read something that Dr. Beverly Ann Smallwell had posted, and she was actually posting it, as an article or something that somebody had else written, a pretty fascinating topic. But she posted something else. I'm not just trying to hack Beverly, but she posted something else that kind of got my attention because it was something that, in conjunction with what we were talking about, and it's about the power of communication. And I also noticed, for those of you who didn't hear the last episode, Dr. Beverly Smallwood is a psychologist here in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, very well known, renowned, just like Richard. And I noticed that I tend to attract, now my closest friends are psychologists and psychotherapists. Do you think, is there something Freudian going on here, or you think I'm just getting free help?
Oh, it could be, we attract what we put out. So it might be that as you've grown as a person, become more in touch with yourself, more aware that those are people that have come into your orbit, because they're the kind you're vibrating on the same kind of frequencies as those people. It could be that we all as a group collectively, maybe unconsciously, feel that you need a lot of help and wants to give that to you. You know.
I want to say both, actually. I think there's a sympathy factor on both of your parts, and also we do kind of attract, because actually that's how you and I ended up getting back together. Or after our first lengthy conversation, it was like, well, we have a passion to kind of help people, so let's get together and see if we can. And all this time later, here we are having this conversation. So.
Yeah.
Uh, let us get to the topic. And I'm going to read what she actually posted. And I think she's kind of talking about marriage, but we're going to cover all of the aspects of communication, because the more I started thinking about it, the power of the tongue is, we talked about how laughter affects mood and environment, people around you. Well, man, what you say and what you convey to other people and how you do it is one of the most important things out there. And so what she said was, when couples come to see me at the Hope Center, that's the name of her clinic, by the way, no matter what the presenting problem, I know that work with communication is in order. This is true in every area of life where relationships are important. The abilities to share, listen, and understand are rare. Intent and impact are often misaligned. This does not have to be. Biblical wisdom, which we're going to get into because there's a lot of it here, provides valuable guidance. Speak the truth in love, be slow to speak and quick to listen. Love your neighbor as yourself. Don't make assumptions. Communication has not taken place until the message is received in the way it was intended. That takes an investment of time and attention, but it is so worth it. You have any thoughts on that post there?
Yeah, beautiful, Pat. Thank you for reading that. And yeah, I'd love to meet Beverly. She sounds like an amazing woman. The other scripture that sprang into my mind instantly was and I can't remember the reference, but it's like don't bring your gift to the altar while you've still got conflict going on with like your fellow man, like words to that effect. And it's like it's saying that, like that, don't come to me while you're still warring and squabbling with someone else. Like you need to go and sort that out. So it strongly suggests it's telling us to, like to deal with our differences, our conflicts. I really like that one as well. That's one that's helped me out, when I've been kind of wrapped up in myself and, perceived or real kind of conflict or insult. So that really kind of springs to mind. And just like, we all need connection, be that with each other, be that with ourselves, be that with our environment, and of course, be that, in the relationship that we build, that we're called to have with Jesus. We all need that connection, 100%. There's a school of therapy called transpersonal, which is about spiritual. It's about the spiritual realm, like bringing, spirituality into the psychotherapy relationship. And there's this idea that somewhere in those early wounds, of childhood or even infancy, our ability to relate to the other, i.e., like the primary caregiver, gets disturbed, disrupted, broken, and then that break in relationship means that when we grow up and we're trying to connect with God, like actually we've lost that ability, like it's got impaired, you know, and that if you repair through the therapy, if you repair the ability to relate, to connect, like in the context of the therapeutic relationship, then actually you allow someone the ability to then connect with everything, including God, including the wonders of having that relationship. And I really like that idea. I think there's really something to that. Somewhere along the way, for those of us that have struggled with like addictions and other mental health problems, that ability to be in relationship has got disrupted, and that is the root of all psychological ills. Really, that's the philosophy. I like that.
I was going to, well, that's what I was going to ask you. Was there any clinical approaches? And you just kind of described that. And that's excellent. I didn't really think about it. I don't think we just don't place the value on our tongues and what we say. And we had a saying, I don't know if you had this growing up in England, but do you remember the old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me? That,
Yeah,
that
the
was the,
most nonsense, like the most like toxic, damaging, like.
right.
And I remember that being said to me, when I was getting bullied, like, and I was bullied quite a lot. Like, it was different to how it is now. I'm really glad I didn't grow up in the era of cyberbullying. So my bullying largely it stopped when I got home. And of course now, like through smartphones and devices, it follows people home, and it's with them, everywhere. And so I didn't have to experience any of that. But like, yeah, I got bullied a fair bit, and I was a big kid. I was very overweight and a bit different and soft and sensitive kid, and I got bullied a fair bit, and that was, and I reached out for help. And this isn't a blame thing, but it's to my parents. They weren't particularly equipped to deal with a lot of things, right? And that was a big part of what they said. Well, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never help me. And the record would seem to show, based on how my life went after that, that may not have been the most effective approach. So because yeah, words hurt, man. Like, well, there's a story that I really like. I got sent it in one of those kind of chain, WhatsApp messenger things like a long time ago, and it's about nails in a wall, and it's the idea that when you bang a nail or picture hook or whatever into a wall, Yeah. And then when you take it out, you can fill it and you can sand it and you can, repaint the wall and you can do the most beautiful job. But if you look close enough, you will always be able to see the mark that that nail left. And the idea of the story was that actually that's what cruel, hurtful words do. They always leave their mark, no matter how well repaired it is. And I think there's really something to that, Pat.
I think that's, as you said, the sticks and stones comment was total nonsense because a doctor can repair a broken bone, but you can say something to somebody, especially when they're young, that you can ruin their life. Tell somebody they're dumb, tell somebody, like you said, didn't really think about the bullying aspect of it, but that's it. You're being told things that when you're young, that have an impact on you and they just last in your mind. I wasn't really thinking about that, but that's all part of communication and what you're saying to people. The kind of reminds me, and I don't mean to refer back to my book, but and my dad, great man, fantastic. Love my dad. We had a fantastic relationship, but he was that from that World War II generation, end of the thing. And they just led a harder thing. And, they weren't into the self-esteem of the kids. And my dad would call me useless. If I went out and the lawnmower broke or whatever, you were totally useless. Well, what do you think? That sunk into me. I remembered that stayed with me, but I just little words or things that people said. But to the book, I don't know if you remember the story, but do you remember how I was, like I would come to school late and there was one class I went to history because I loved going to history class, but I'd had this reputation by the time I got in the 10th grade that the teachers, I could walk in and out of the school and the teachers never really said anything. The principal actually called me in one time and said, Pat, I'm not going to get on. I'm not here to get on to you or anything. We just want you to come to class. I mean, I kind of had that reputation. And one day I walk into my second period class. I would get up and start driving to school, and then I would smoke on the way over there, and then I'd decide to go to Burger King first, and then I would come walking into my second period class. Well, I had a teacher named Miss Hudson, a little short lady, had this little bob haircut, and I walked in one day. I stroll into class about 5 minutes late, and I start walking back to the back to sit next to my buddy Scott Graham. And as I'm walking back there, this woman said, "Well, good morning, Pat." And it catches me off guard because I'm like, "Does she not get the memo? That I'm a thug and nobody's supposed to say anything to me." And so I just kind of looked at her and smiled and started to sit down. And she said it again. She said, "Good morning, Pat." She said, Pat, I'm so glad you made it today. She said, because there's something about you. I don't know what it is, but I really like you. And I'm just stunned. I was like, what? I'm thinking you're sending me out of the class. You're telling me this is the last time I disrupt the class. She said, I just think and she repeated it like 3 times. There's just something about you that I really like. I really like you. And had this big smile on her face. I can see it like it was yesterday. That comment stuck with me. At that point, I just kind of stuck in my head. I'm like, okay, I'm not this thug that I'm trying to act out. And this little woman up here, and she strategically said that to me. She didn't just get up and say, okay, I'm gonna sit. She's probably thinking, this guy, that thinks he's this. And she said this, that I really like you. I just really like you, and had this big smile on her face. Stuck with me. Probably not a month that goes by. Even through my troubles, as I kept getting in more trouble, I kept remembering, Miss Hudson said that she really liked me. So there's got to be some good inside me. But those things really stick, what you say to people and what you communicate with people. Along the way, the bullying, I didn't really think about that. Man, I'm thrilled we don't have the cyberbullying. Like you said, you could deal with it at school, but once you got out of there or you fought in the parking lot or whatever, it was all good. But now there's so many people. Probably what has led so much to suicide rates and we discussed that earlier, the massive suicide rates, but so much is communication and what people say to others, because they can lift people up and they can tear them down. When you're doing um, your clinical work, do you ever talk about like what people say to themselves, not just to what you say
Oh,
to? to other
Yeah, yeah,
people.
yeah, yeah. That kind of internal dialogue, 100%, and it's really, y- y- those messages that get picked up in childhood, like they really stick, and you see that in the way that people talk to themselves. Like, you're useless. Why did you do that? What's wrong with you? All those kind of things, and actually helping, I think, people to like kind of understand where that comes from and start to reframe some of those beliefs is really really important. Um, yeah, that's a big part of it. Definitely, is understanding that kind of internal dialogue, and often, I mean, it, sometimes those that internal dialogue, it can be really harsh, but it's almost trying to serve a purpose, right? It's like if I'm told, say I'm told I'm useless, right? So like dad tells me I'm useless, right? But I need dad, right? Like, I want dad's approval, I want his love, like I'm hardwired towards that, right? Like, we're wired to connect with our caregivers, right? For survival, yeah. It's like I'm a little kid, yeah, like and I depend on mum and dad like for everything, yeah. Like, I can't even reach the tap, the faucet, or whatever you lot call it, right? Like, to get the water. Yeah, like food, clothing, shelter, warmth, everything. I depend on mum and dad, right? So I'm hardwired to try and connect with them for survival. Yeah. So I want to maintain the connection with dad. Yeah. So when he doesn't think I'm useless, I get that connection. Yeah. When I'm showing him I've got some use, right? I'm connected with him. But when he thinks I'm useless, I'm not. Yeah, he's over there and he's angry and he doesn't want to know me, right? Very much part of my story too, Pat, right? So you can end up with this voice that's telling you useless, you need to try harder, you need to do better. Yeah, and actually what that voice is trying to do is trying to protect you. Yeah, because it's trying to spur you on to be useful rather than useless. Yeah. So it becomes internalized like that. But that actually ends up being a really harsh thing to live with, right? And then often there will be addiction on the back of that, because like having a drink or a drug might be the only thing that allows you some respite from this relentless like drive to try and be useful. So yeah, like, I mean, look, long answer, Pat, yeah, but like, yeah, definitely starting to unpack that stuff and understand it and reframe it is, look, of critical importance. The way that we relate to ourselves is as important as anything else, I would say. And of course, if I'm always, just one more word on that, Pat, right? If I'm always striving to be useful, then it's very difficult to be authentically connected to someone, because consciously or unconsciously I'm always trying to be being like a good boy, essentially, and that's not real. That will stop me doing things that are messy, or wanting to like ask for help, to allow, like, to just be like present in relationship, because I'm always trying to be this thing that it's very hard to do consistently. Does that make sense? So it's not
Yeah,
the
it makes a
best
lot of sense. And
answer.
yeah, you actually took it in a direction that because I was thinking, because when my dad would say that to me, I just shut him out. Because I thought, not shut him out, I just thought, well, I am useless. I was just like, well, that's probably who I am if my dad is saying that. So I think a lot of that people just get into them that this is what I am. I am useless. What difference does it make? So I'm going to go off and create all this chaos that I did. But what you opened up was I see this all the time. It can be in marriages as people going, they're always striving. When they were young, they were made to feel. Uh, that they didn't measure up. I think we talked about it in an episode a while back. They've been made to feel that they don't measure up, so they're always out and they're always stressed. I know people personally that are always stressed trying to be perfect, because when they were younger, they were made to feel that they didn't measure up. They're always trying to. I had I though when my dad said you're useless, I'm like, yeah, well, probably basically am. I'm going to go get high and do drugs and do whatever. I'm not saying that was the reason why, but I kind of took it that way. Oh, also, uh, yelling, like if you're raising your voice at somebody, that I stopped listening at that point. But I just wonder
Mm.
with self talk, and this may not be a great analogy, but it's your confidence in what you're doing, what you're telling yourself. You're going to do, just like in comedy, when I first started in comedy, that voice was like, what if it goes wrong? What if it this? Once I got good at it, I'm always like, okay, I'm waiting for this guy just in front of me just to be quiet. So I'm ready to go up there because I'm expecting something good. So as life went on, I developed where that confidence. But if you're telling yourself things that, you may screw up, you may mess up. If you've had that stimuli put in your head, there's a good chance you will. I always think of this time back in, when I was in basic training. We grew up in America, uh, and we grew up watching the World War II movies. And by the way, I've always wondered, where were you Brits during World War II? Because all the American World War II movies, we never see you guys. It was us. It's like
Yeah.
nothing about London being bombed. I mean, occasionally you might see a couple of chaps having some tea as the Americans were going towards the fighting. But if you watched an American war movie, you thought, hey, it was just us.
Yeah, well, I think, Pat, there'd be a lot less war movies to be made if you lot had turned up a little bit earlier. That's all I'd say on
So
that.
is that what it is? Yeah. Could be. But back to my analogy. So I grew up thinking, okay, I said I don't hunt, but you always mention AR-15s. I can shoot an AR-15 because
Of course you can, Pat. You know what I mean? Of course you can.
not
Let's be,
just because I grew
let's
up in
let's not
Mississippi.
let's not kid each other here.
It's not just because I grew up in Mississippi, but the United States Army actually paid for me to learn paid for me to learn how to shoot an AR-15 and throw a hand grenade, this is my illustration. I was the platoon guide, and which means I got to go into the sergeant's office, and I would know what we were going to do. And I saw we were going to the grenade range. Well, oh man, a good old American boy like myself, we're going to be throwing hand grenades, guys. 2 days we're going out to the hand grenade range. Everybody's all excited about it because we've seen the war movies and we've seen the hand grenades. So me and my buddy, we go through all this, the kind of training day, and then you go up to the actual range where you're going to throw the hand grenade. So we get out of this truck and we start walking up this hill, and all of a sudden, I hear this massive boom, boom, and the ground shakes. And I mean, my behind just just tightened up. It dawned on me. I was like, wait a minute. Is that what we're gonna go with? The sound that just happened up there and this ground moving, this is what we're actually going to do. That's apparently somebody that just had one of those hand grenades in their hand. And I was sweating by the time I got up there. The whole thing changed. I started telling myself I'm going to drop. Oh, what if I drop it? If I drop it, they're going to spray me out of here with a fire hose. What if the pin doesn't come out of there? So I'm all nervous by the time I get up there to do the hand grenade. And then I get the hand grenade, I walk down into the pit, and I stand there and the guy says to open the box. And I opened the box and I looked at that hand grenade, and all of a sudden I told myself, I heard a voice in my head say, you have made a lot of mistakes in your life, but dropping this hand grenade is not going to be one
To
of
be
them.
one of them. Yeah.
Just all of a sudden, a voice in my head said, there is zero chance you're going to drop this hand grenade. There is zero chance you're not going to throw it over this wall the way you're supposed to. The stakes are too high. And once once I told myself that, I got completely calm. Matter of fact, I pulled it out and kind of looked at the guy like, what do you want me to do with it now? All of a sudden, I got cocky because I had just told myself, I'm not going to mess this up. You see what I'm saying? But my voice in my head prior to that was telling me, you know, good chance, what possibly could happen. So that's why I was just wondering if in your clinical research, if you teach people to tell themselves, I mean, confidence in life, that you do expound on that in your work.
Yeah, like self-esteem work, self-belief, definitely like changing core beliefs, changing like life scripts. There's different kind of angles and different names for it. Cognitive behavioral therapy, like challenging the thoughts that we have about ourselves, looking for evidence, pros and cons. There's a really nice, it's really basic, but there's it's like an old fact, like old piece of work. It's been around for decades, right? But like there's a worksheet, a cognitive behavioral therapy worksheet called the Judge, and you essentially put the things that you tell yourself about yourself in the doc, yeah, and then you have a case for the prosecution and a case for the defence. So you would list all of the say mine is like I'm useless, and you would put all the evidence down that you are useless, right? And like you actually you honour that, you make room for it, yeah. But then the case with the defence is all the evidence that actually that counteracts that, that goes against that, that says actually you aren't useless, and you really break it down and challenge it, and you help people to actually start to see that the things that we tell ourselves about ourselves are not true, and or they're not like completely true. It depends on the person, right? Because like we've all, I've got certainly got events in my life where I can demonstrate like where I was useless. I was a
Yeah,
use. Yeah,
yeah, he
I
was telling
was.
the truth at the time.
Yeah, yeah, I was. But I mean, actually, and let's challenge that a little bit. It's like, like, because you broke the lawnmower does not mean you're useless. Yeah, like you have no use. So it's reframing that and challenging that and that stuff. And then in terms of that, like connection to others, I guess kind of bringing it back around to that, bringing that into focus again, is like the beliefs that we tell ourselves in the context of our relationships with other people. You know, I'm not likable. People. People. If I show people this about, something about myself like that, I'm vulnerable or imperfect, then they won't want to know me. And so it's like challenging those things as well and helping people to have a different experience in relationships. So you can challenging all of that, those kind of thoughts and beliefs as well. So yeah, like tons of that sort of stuff really, I think is really important. And just general, I mean, this is going all over the place a little bit, but like, there will be people, sometimes people come up and it's like, like I always get rejected, people always leave me. And it's like challenging that, but it's also like looking at, well, how can you communicate who you are, what your needs are, what your wants are, like in different ways that actually mean like you don't always end up in the same situation, Like, so for me, I know what I've done before and what I'm actually working really hard um, on doing now with my fiance, and having some success with, I'd say, is, my thing is when I feel like misunderstood, unheard, slighted, rejected, taken advantage of, taken for granted. That's a big one for me. Then rather than communicate any of that stuff, I cut off, go within, yeah, like just kind of put up a wall, an invisible wall between me and the other person, become quite inauthentic, yeah, and then but then on my side of the wall, like I'm off thinking about doing all sorts of things, looking for the exit essentially, right? And I've done that, in pretty much every relationship I've had up to this point, and actually, so like going against that and learning how to communicate when I'm upset or feel unheard, and all of those things, and being able to have a conversation about that, like, and that is how I stay in relationship, and I don't just mean like living in the same house and as the other person. I mean like being in a relationship with them where both sides are turning up and I'm doing my bit to turn up and be me, and that's how I stay in relationship today, which is a beautiful thing to be able to do, even though it's really hard sometimes.
It just takes a long time when are you saying like you would shut down, just like shut off?
Yeah, I
Like
can go through the motions, yeah, and just
yeah,
like put on a kind of like Richard mask, like, hey baby, yeah,
no,
like where are we gonna go today? What do you need? Are you okay? How's your day? But inside I'm gone. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I did that. When we first got, when Glenn and I first got married, I mean, I told you 35 years, don't make me break the lanyard out, showing my 35
have
years
you
of
been
marriage.
married 35 years, Pat? Hey,
I've never told you how.
never mentioned. You should have mentioned that, man. You should. Why didn't you say something?
I should have
Yeah,
shared. I should have shared that with you. I don't want to
yeah,
sound like I don't want to be obnoxious and sound like I'm bragging, but it was
yeah.
like,
You'll have to give me a few moments just to take that in. This is such revolutionary information. Like I'm almost.
right,
Oh God, I need a minute, Pat.
you need a tissue. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, got several.
Right. Well, if I say that so our listeners will know where I've got a little moxie on this, but I have to tell people though, those years, first years, 5, 10 years, we fought all the time. One of the things that I would do though, was just shut down. I'm like, nope, I've had it. And I would just shut off. Like, I'm not talking, I'm not communicating, I'm not saying anything. And I think that's kind of what you were alluding to. I would just shut down. Like, I'm just not speaking. I've had enough of this, and I'm going on about my business. But, uh, we actually, that's some very interesting information on what you were saying about what we were talking. So I wasn't going to spend as much time on that, but that's some really valuable information, because I was really thinking of, in the beginning, is communicating and how we deal with people in general in public. It's, if you can master how you communicate with other people, I don't care if it's the spouse, I don't care if it's family, I don't care if it's a person you're running into, somebody you're working, the way that you communicate. I told you the story one day, not on the podcast, but when we were talking about how I was literally in the parking lot praying at the gas station, just thanking God. I was having a great day, and a woman pulls up behind me, and she's waiting for me to back out, and I'm trying to be nice, and then I look back and I see her, she's gesturing wildly like I'm some kind of an idiot. And I went from Holy Spirit to lunatic, in about a quarter of a second. I'm willing to jump out and start hurling insults at her, because, I make a living with my mouth, so I'm pretty good at it. And then I just started realizing, why would you want to act that way? God doesn't want us to act that way, because in Galatians 5:22-23, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, and against such things there is no law. And you referred to that other just a minute ago. If we're really wanting to follow Jesus and do what God wants us to do you really think he approves of me going out there and losing my temper? I didn't say that to the woman, but I wanted to. But in the past, I have just, all of a sudden it just starts coming out of the mouth, insulting, saying nasty things to people, or um, but with kindness, just being kind and speaking in gentle terms, just like in relationships. You're talking about in marriage. One of the things with Gwen and I, and you and I talked about this, you start a fight. You're going to argue over these small things, especially when you get married. You're jockeying for a position for years. And then you start hurling insults. 2 hours later, you don't even know what you started the fight about. But now I'm ready to pack the car and head down the road because of all the insulting things that she said to me in response to the insulting things that I said to her. So now we've made an entirely mess. Now we really got something to be mad about, because I've said some insults. She said some insults, and it was all over nothing. It was all because of the way that we communicated. Because if you're focusing on what it says in Galatians 5:22-23, fruit of the Spirit's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness. That's the way we're supposed to respond to people. So when you go out in public, I don't care if it's in a grocery store, I don't care if it's in business, if you always respond in self-control, in peace, you're not just going to have a much better relationship with anybody and everybody that you come in contact with, but you're going to be pleasing God. You're going to be closer to God, because you now know that you are walking in the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, 100%. I think what I would add to that is, for me, certainly from my, faith perspective, theological standpoint, however you want to think about it, is like it's the fruit of the Spirit, because like actually it's like when we've got the Spirit in us, yeah, when we've like made those steps towards a relationship with Jesus, right? That's the fruit that grows within us. So it's like actually, if I've got Jesus in my life, that's what equips me to demonstrate all of those things. Like I don't have to demonstrate all of those things in order to be or embody the fruit and to earn his love. He loves me anyway. I have his grace, the Holy Spirit dwells within me. And if I can contact that, and like, if I'm doing the things that help me to remain in contact with that, reading the word, praying, spending time with other believers, going to church, worshiping, tithing, I think also is part of it for me, um, doing the things, right? It's not, I don't have to try and be and embody those qualities. Like those qualities start to grow within me because he is within, I'm living in him and he's living in me, and I can be, that will help me to become more Christ-like. And it's not that we don't have to try, But it's like having that stuff in me is what motivates me and gives me the ability to be those things, you know. Because without him, I'm none of those things, you know, or I'm certainly capable of being. But I can be horrible, you know. When we'd have a, you know, and I've always done this. It's not just, it's not just, you know, my current lady who gets the, you know, the full Richard Turrell experience, right? But like, you know, like we'll have a row, you know, and like I say, this happens, you know, universally in my relationship history, you know, like, and I'll be told, you know, you did this and you did that, and where I go to is you are this and you are that. Like I'm like not just a, you know, it stops being a row about like something that's happened and it becomes a row about like literally like the character, the very existence of the person I'm arguing with, you know, like, and I'll get really, you know, I've left a lot of holes in the wall, you know, and you know, towards the start of the relationship that I'm in at the moment, like my partner, she said like when you say those things, it tarnishes our relationship, and you never really get that off, and that really stayed with me. You know, it's like when I do that stuff, it, you know, you leave a stain on things that it's very difficult to get off completely. You know, so when you clean a bit of silver, yeah, and you clean the tarnish off, it's very difficult to get it back 100% to exactly the shininess that it was before. So
What she said is true, because there were things that Gwen would for years say, well, you said that. I mean, it went in her hard drive, something like, well, you said I was there. I'm like, yeah, but I didn't really mean it, and it was coming from this bad place. Uh, so obviously, you know, you've had that same experience. What, you can't unsay it. You know, once you've said it, you've put it in there, and she, as she said, it leaves a stain, and then she, you know, she'll remember it in a few years. You know, you end up having to work. So communication, especially in marriage. And before we get into some of the scriptures of what God tells us, also in marriage, it's just so important to discuss and communicate everything that's going on in your life. If it's financial, if it's anything. So many people in marriage uh, keep things to themselves, or start or lead separate lives on these different paths. I know situations where people, well, I didn't want to tell my husband this, or I didn't want to tell that. The most important thing, you know, we're originally talking about how you talk about and how you respond to people, but I think it's just so important to tell people and live a life together in marriage. That's how Gwen and I came together. Did you know I've been married 35 years? And one of the most important things in being married 35 years was that we got to where we just discuss things right off the bat. I have a saying: bad news, negative news, I want it quick and I want it straight. She's, you know, if I come in the door and something happens, she's got to tell me something bad. This is it. Just tell it to me. I remember once in the first 4 or 5 years of our marriage, she made $1,000 mistake in the bank account. I thought I had $1,000 more in there. This was back when $1,000 is still a good bit of money, but you know, I was just like, you got to be. And she was so reluctant to tell me, thinking that I was just going to go off and I was going to, you know, but I didn't. I was like, well, I saw how that happened. And then we just got together and worked through it. What I'm getting at is a married couple, it's us against, not against the world, but it's us doing this thing. And if you're in a relationship that you don't think you can completely communicate what's going on with your husband, you're not there yet. You're still in an arrangement. Your marriage happens when you discuss anything and everything. Bad news, hey, I got to sit down and tell you this. I got to take the medicine, and let's go on. So that might be something, you know, think about as you're going on in your life. It's a little different what we were talking about, but communication is so important in a marriage. You shouldn't ever be worried about if I tell this person what the ramifications are going to be. And if my wife has a problem, it's my problem. If I have a problem, you know, and vice versa. Doesn't matter who caused it or whatever. That communication is so important, and I think people in marriage need to realize that you should always, if you've got something stressing you and bothering you, even if it's something you did or whatever it is, always discuss it. Always bring it out and always discuss it. Because if you're married to the person that God put in your life, it's going to all work out and it's going to all bring you closer together. So let me read back to what we were talking about, what God is telling us. He says, be slow to speak and thoughtful. Now, this is James 1:19. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. That's back to what he's saying. Be slow. If people can just learn to be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to get angry, that's really hard for somebody like me and you, because me and you are probably carrying, and I imagine a lot of other people are. Proverbs 17:28. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. Proverbs 13:3. Whoever guards his mouth preserves his life. He who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. It's God telling us over and over again about controlling our anger, controlling what we say. And it's just he's telling us what what he wants us to know and how he wants us to comport ourselves. Speak with grace and kindness. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know you ought to answer each person, or how you ought to answer each person. That's Colossians 4:6. Proverbs 15:1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Very similar to what we're just talking about. Proverbs 17:28. Gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. And then speak truth and for the needy. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. So he's telling us there, use your mouth to lift people up, not bring
Yeah.
people down.
And
Go ahead, you got.
yeah, no, what I notice on that is when if I'm in, like, that little bit of kind of rattiness, that little bit of narky little bitchiness, whatever you want to call it, right? I'm not sure how many of these terms translate across the pond, right? But like
Same.
that little bit of nastiness, and it's like I'm like, I might be talking with friends, or even my fiance, or did you see that guy, like, he's, doing this or doing that, or did you hear what he said, or do you see those shoes? Did you see those shoes that guy was wearing? Who would go out of the house wearing that? Why would he wear those with that? What bit do you think he put on first? Or, like those kind of things, right? It doesn't feed my spirit. Like, it doesn't feed my spirit. Whereas when I can, even if I think those things, if I can actually flip it, say something nice, look for the good in people, or even just as you read out there in the Proverbs, right, just keep my mouth shut. Yeah, that feeds my spirit. That feeds my spirit 100%. And another quote that springs to mind, perhaps from a slightly different source, is the loudest man in the room is the weakest man in the room. And that is Frank Lucas in the film American Gangster. So, yeah, good film,
Oh,
by the way. Watch that.
I haven't seen it. I don't. But that I have the attention span of a gerbil, so I haven't watched a lot. I don't watch a lot of films, but that is true. And finally, just a few more. It says, be mindful of the power of your words. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits. Set a guard, and that's Proverbs 18:21. Psalm 141:3. Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over my lips. I mean, it's just God over and over telling us how important how we communicate. And then out of the Matthew 12:34, out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. So back to kind of what you were saying earlier, what's in your mouth is what kind of comes out. So it makes it easier when you've changed your heart, or you've changed you've changed the way you think, and you have let the Holy Spirit take hold of your life. That will reflect in what's coming out and what you're saying, and also vice versa. When you're not letting yourself get angry, you're getting more self-control. Then the Holy Spirit's taking more place, his more rightful place in our lives. And one other thing communication is not just what we say. It's not just, don't get angry. Be careful what you're saying to people. Be kind. Always respond. You can say wars have probably started over what people said. If you respond to somebody in a kind way and always realize God is in trouble, and I think what's happened in you and I and both of our lives is the more peace that we have gotten all throughout our lives, we know Jesus is in control of our lives. I don't have to win some argument with somebody. I don't have to make my point. It's not getting me anywhere. You
Mm,
want to live in peace and harmony with the Holy Spirit. Speak gently, speak kind, especially to those that you love. Encourage people, lift people up. Tell the young person. I talked to this girl this week, and she was saying, I just feel like a horrible person. And then she started listing those things off, and I started asking her some other questions about herself. And I was like, wait a second. So you did this and you did that. And I noticed that when you walked in here, the way you greeted this person and you had a smile on her face. And I started listing all these things. And she just lit up. And then we started having this conversation about God, the girl was almost in tears. She just never really thought about that. She had a traumatic life. She started telling me, well, it was kind of traumatic growing up. Yeah, well, people probably always told you about the bad part. Well, yeah, I'm like, no, I've just observed all of these great things about you, and that's who you really are. See
yeah.
that big smile on your face? That's who you are. And it was ironic because God had been tapping on her shoulder. She said, I've been thinking more and more about God. And then I was like, yeah, well, maybe our conversation wasn't by accident. So, and it's not just verbal. A lot of times, like road. Do you guys have a lot of road rage in England?
What you road rage?
Road rage. Do you know what road
Road
rage
rage.
is?
Yeah, no, we have a lot of road rage in this country. In fact, I am, at least in public, like pretty calm. You know, behind closed doors, not always, but at least in public, fairly calm. But one thing that will get, like, I've stalked people, that have, like just raging about, and like I can't fight, like far from it. You know what I mean? Like if actually, one of these encounters ever came to something, but like when someone's like flipped me off or, whatever, like because of some poor decision I've made on the road. Like I consumed with rage, But I mean, I've never got out of the car and beaten anyone up. But yeah, no, there's plenty of that. Like you see plenty of that on the UK roads. We have a lot less guns though, so that makes it.
You're
That
not,
puts a
you're not,
very
you're
different
not jumping
slant
out.
on it.
Okay, not pointing out the AR starting popping off rounds.
Yeah,
Oh,
when I was in Mississippi, I was, fascinated. I'm fascinated by like gun culture, And I was driving down the road with a friend who had a very large truck, the size of some, like people live in smaller apartments than that in my
that's a
country.
status. That's a status symbol in
That's
Mississippi.
just,
Don't show
oh,
up in the BMW and the Benz. You show up in the Ford
yeah,
F-250 double cab. There's a successful man.
yeah. I'm fascinated by gun culture, but I was asking my friend about it, and he said, "Oh, I always carry a gun. I feel naked if I haven't got one." And I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah." And I was like, "Why?" And he spoke about, obviously it's culturally very different, and there's a lot more threats from other people that have got guns, so you carry a gun, and so on and so forth. Right? But he said a polite society, an armed society, is a polite society. So it really gave me something to think about.
Yeah, he is on something. Because there might be consequences if you say something to the wrong person. I stopped having bro offs in bars when I was young. You know what a bro off is? Come
Yeah,
at me,
yeah,
bro. You have no intention of fighting the guy, but you're going to show everybody how tough you are. Because I was in a bar like when I was 19 years old, and I saw this guy mouth off to this other guy that I knew was a really tough hombre in the town that I lived in. And about 3 minutes later, this guy was on the floor. There was teeth on the ground. I mean, I don't want to get great, but I was like, oh my gosh, this is what could happen if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person. So um, I learned to don't let my alligator mouth get me into trouble. But
yeah,
on the road rage, what I was saying, a lot of times it's because we're assuming that this person is intentionally disrespecting us. it's like you said, it's just the way the person reacted. In Mississippi, people are in the South, you're very polite. Somebody pulls up, you'll let them go. If the light turns green and the person is on their phone, you give it a little love tap on the horn, like a little pimp, 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 just, hey, light's green. Up north, when I was living in New York, that's not the case. It's like,
No.
I mean, if the light thought about turning green, just, they it was it was an aggressive type thing. But I just think a lot of times we assume, and I meant to mention that earlier in all our other conversations about personality and relationships, and in America, we do a lot of assuming. You assume that this other person is coming from a place that they're not. That will get you into a lot of trouble. I see the Richard brain going. You're about to say something?
You were talking about the difference between driving in the South and driving up in New York, right? And when I moved, as you know, I was living out of London for, just under a year until quite recently. And so in London, you drive in a certain way, right? Because like you need to put out on people. You need to push in, otherwise you're not going to get anywhere, right? And and then I was living out of London, and I had this moment where I was in the wrong lane. I needed to get into the next lane, to kind of come off where I needed to come off. Right. And I looked in my mirror and I was like, yeah, I can make that. And I shot out. And the guy behind me, like, bibbed, he's all like, what are you doing? Do you know what I mean? And I realised that actually, like, if I'd waited for him to go past, there was nothing but empty space behind him. All I had to do was wait like 2 seconds. Yeah. And I thought, actually, I don't need, this is perfectly normal in London, what I just did. But like, I don't need to do that. I don't need to drive like that here. And but then he bibbed me, and he was obviously quite unhappy. So then I stalked him for a bit. Then I stalked him for a bit.
Talked him to tailgate him a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, a lot of times, though, like I said, you assume that person cut up. That person might not have even seen you or whatever, but you're assuming that you just got disrespected. So
Yeah, and actually, even just thinking about it now, actually, he's probably like a bit shaken up. Do you know what I mean? Because he'd had to slam his brakes on to avoid a collision because some guy in front of him's just made a completely unnecessary manoeuvre. And actually, that's very different, isn't it? It's a very different slant to put on it. But yeah, anyway.
yeah, I've always thought that, but it's communication. If you can, if a person can master what we're talking about today and the scriptures that we read, that this is what God's telling us. He's telling us how important communication is. But I've just learned you can add so much peace to yourself, to your life, to those around you. You can be an uplifter. You can be an encourager, and also what you're saying to yourself. So the tongue and communicating verbally and non-verbally uh, is so incredibly important that if people paid attention to it and learn to master it, it will help you tremendously in your life. And I think we can leave it there. Rich, do you have any final thoughts? Or
That's it, Patrick. That's it. Nothing more from me today.
all right.
I do thank you for sharing what you shared about, those experiences with your father. I was thinking that perhaps an alternative title for this podcast could be the secret psychoanalysis of Pat McCall. As each session goes past, I feel like, this is giving you space to really start to unpack some things about your childhood. And so it's been it's a worthwhile endeavor, even if all we're doing is giving you some free counseling between
That,
me and
that's
Beverly.
that,
Yeah.
Y'all, you're on to me there, Rich. When we get to episode 100, I'm writing a book, and this
Yeah.
is all. I'm just working the angles here,
Yeah.
I'm working
Yeah.
the
Are
angles.
you even putting these out?
Yeah, I didn't even. I'm not even publishing these. I'm going in, analyzing, pulling the laptop up, sending drafts to Simon and Schuster. I'm like, I'm working on it. I'm like, this guy is giving me all of this stuff for free.
It's gold, man. It's
It's like,
gold.
you know how much he charges an hour? And he just comes on here for like a half hour. I'm taking him away. I'm probably causing trouble in his marriage. But it's all going to pay off in the end. I'll give him a little credit down at the bottom. I'll credit, Richard Turl. So So there it is, man. Well, I do appreciate your time. Say hello to your lovely bride, and we will see you next time. And to everybody out there, encourage somebody. Watch what you say and watch how you say it, and watch what you say to yourself and how you say it, and you'll see your life improve exponentially. That's a big word, Rich.
That is a big word, Pat. Well done, man.
All right.
Proud of you, brother.
I'm working on that too. All right, man. We'll see you, and God bless everybody out there.
God bless. Bye.